We often get asked what a zoo does in the 21st century. In fact, we think the word zoo doesn't fully explain what we're doing. So let's share with you what that is.
We run breeding and recovery programs for many local species on the brink of extinction.
We treat injured wildlife in our wildlife hospitals and send vets to run the triage centres in bushfire zones.
We're ready to respond to any marine animal needing our help.
We teach millions of visitors to care for the natural world and make wildlife-friendly choices.
Perhaps zoo isn't the right word at all.
Because we're actually a wildlife conservation organisation.
And for some species, we are their last hope.
We won't let Victoria's wildlife go extinct on our watch.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this live broadcast from Zoos Victoria. It is such a pleasure to welcome you to the final of our conversation.
Conservation conversations.
Conservation conversations. It's a tongue twister and they make us do it all the time. It really is a great pleasure to welcome you tonight, and joining me on the couch is Dr. Sally Sherwen. Welcome, Sal.
Thank you.
And it's quite dark outside, and it would have been wonderful to have you all joining us in Leopard Lodge. Tonight, we have a special welcome because it is the end of Reconciliation Week, and I'd like to start by paying our respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we gather, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. It has been for us an extraordinary week through Reconciliation Week of talking to traditional owners of the land and elders. We have had deep conversations with people on the land. We have had Marindindi come to our amazing zoos of both Healesville Sanctuary and Melbourne Zoo and do smoking ceremonies where he welcomed people back to our country and back to the land, as well as a week where we see today being Mabo Day, an incredible day of the first time that the law recognized Aboriginal title, and just really moving to be part of all these ceremonies. And so it was with that lens that I welcome you to this talk tonight, and pay respect also to the traditional elders of the land on which you're all gathering with us today. I'd also like to say a special welcome. We have a couple of our board members on the webinar. Our board chair, Kate Bino, and it's delighted to have you joining us, Kate, and thank you for taking part in this. What we're going to be talking about tonight is optimism. And that might seem like a strange topic, but it's so important to us as conservationists. I like to think that we need to be pragmatic optimists, because that optimism is what gives us the hope that we can make a difference, the hope that we can do something extraordinary and make a difference to animals and to the planet. We're also a little bit overly optimistic this week because we're opened again. We opened up on Monday, the 1st of June at 9 o'clock, a little bit excited. And notwithstanding the rain, we have had phenomenal attendance at all three zoos over the course of the last 3 days. We are sold out at Melbourne Zoo until Tuesday. So I know you're all rushing to come out and see us. Please do, but go online and book. But way too soon. I'm getting way ahead of myself, aren't I, Sal?
Yeah, we've got a bit to cover before we talk about coronavirus, but we'll get there.
Well, actually, we'll bit to cover before we talk about opening. And so the first thing that we're going to be covering tonight is just to talk about optimism and why it is important and actually what it is, Sal. So you're going to share with us a little bit now about what is the psychology of optimism and why is it so important to us?
It is. And so I think when we have statements like what you guys can hopefully see behind us on this wall, that no Victorian terrestrial vertebrate species will go extinct on our watch. That is an ambitious and optimistic commitment that we're completely dedicated to. So along with that, you know, we've got to be truly mindful of how we set ourselves up for achieving that goal. And so when we think about the importance of optimism, there's a lot of science behind it and the psychology behind what it means. And so I'm just going to take a minute and talk through some of this, and hopefully it'll make sense as you register thinking through your own internal experiences as well. So optimism isn't about being, annoyingly positive about everything. Those people can be a little bit much, especially first thing in the morning, but that's not what we're talking about as simply optimism. We're talking about optimism as a way of thinking and approaching problems. So optimists tend to approach a problem in a way that they have a sense of agency or ability to control the outcome. And so they often look for opportunities out of challenges. And it is on a scale or a continuum from what's one end of the scale is pessimism. And that's a bit of a, why bother attitude. It's everything's too hard. It's out of my control. I can't do anything to help, all the way up to the optimistic attitude. And it's actually fascinating because my background of science is animal welfare science. I know quite a bit about the psychology of welfare and mental states and how that can actually influence. And the coolest thing about the study of optimism is that it can be studied in the animal kingdom as well.
In fact, the first time I went to a seminar on animal welfare and the psychology of it, I remember so clearly there was a paper on optimistic cows. And that just caught me, like cows can be optimistic or pessimistic.
Yeah, so if cows can do it, we can do it. But the science behind that process is it's actually called cognitive bias testing. And so it's an approach welfare scientists are starting to use where we can train animals to, so bear with me everyone while I just talk you through some methodology, but I think you're going to find it interesting. So cognitive bias testing is on the assumption that when you are in a certain state of welfare, either negative, neutral, or positive, that influences your optimism or pessimism. And so in animals, what we can do is train them to recognize a certain cue as either positive outcomes. And so, for example, you might train an orangutan to recognize a black dot as good things come when I hit this black dot. Or you can train them to hit a white dot and good things don't come with that white dot. So there's nothing positive associated with that. Then what you can do is put them through a few different tests where you present to them ambiguous cues, so different shades of grey that are on the scale between white and black. And then you assess their response to those, if they're likely to hit it, and the thinking is that if they go for a grey dot, that they're more optimistic, if that's likely to be a black outcome, which is a positive sense, or if they don't approach it, they're more likely to be a pessimistic outcome.
And that's a bit like we talk about a glass half full.
Exactly.
For humans, when we're looking at the same cue, that middle dot, do you perceive it to be full or empty? For animals, do you perceive it to be a good or a bad outcome?
Absolutely. And so this has been studied in a whole range of species, from, as Jenny said, cows all the way up to the higher order apes. But what the most fascinating cognitive bias experiment I've come across in the animal kingdom is honeybees. And they studied it in honeybees and were able to demonstrate that agitated honeybees were more pessimistic than non-agitated honeybees. So anyway, that was a bit of a deviation from...
If I can interrupt, it's a good deviation because it actually shows that optimism and pessimism is not necessarily inherent. It can be driven by what's going on around you.
Exactly. So your underlying psychological state is heavily influencing your optimism or pessimism. The other exciting part to it is that it can be trained or learned. So if you don't consider yourself an optimistic person by nature, you can actually retrain your brain and yourself to be more optimistic. And there's some really exciting work by a local Melbourne group called the Resilience Project, who coach people in the practice of what they call GEM, GEM, gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness. And so this is backed in a lot of science as well. So the practice of gratitude associated with optimism, they did some experiments where they separated a group of uni students into two groups, and they had one group at the end of each day write down 3 things they were grateful for, and that was the gratitude group. Then they had the other half of the class write down 3 things that were hassles for them in the day, and they did daily journaling and ran that for 2 weeks. at the end of 2 weeks, they found significantly positive mood scores in the gratitude group compared to the hassle group, because it actually retrained your brain to focus on the good things in life. And so that's associated with optimism, and empathy and acts of kindness is part of that as well, because it releases the happy hormone of oxytocin. Humans, being a social species, have that sense of bonding and connection through oxytocin release.
And so it seems a little counterintuitive, but actually being a donor, giving money to others, is one of those empathetic acts of kindness. And it actually makes us feel better about ourselves. And particularly in tough situations, you'll find sometimes even the most vulnerable people that we don't expect to be able to afford it will actually donate money to others, because it makes them feel much better, more optimistic.
Absolutely. So that act of kindness and that demonstration of empathy as a social species is really important. Physiologically, the release of oxytocin positively reinforces that for us. And it's a powerful response. So a challenge for everyone listening tonight. We could go down that act of kindness part and focus on helping us do some of the work that we're going to talk about, and we'll get to that. But we also want to set ourselves a challenge of practicing gratitude and trying to focus on the good things in your day. And that is a really interesting practice to start getting your head around.
And Sally, you're not satisfied by just reading about this. Sally actually ran this experiment with her staff here and her team, and you actually got them to journal for a month, didn't you?
Yep, we did a 30-day experiment, and it was quite interesting because we did it late 2019, and as a team of scientists, we thought, what better way to test this out than run an experiment on ourselves? So we did subjective happiness scores in the workplace as a baseline, did this gratitude exercise, and we had random acts of kindness in the office that were great fun. A lot of free coffees were being dished out in that period. Nice. And then we reassessed ourselves after that 2 weeks, and we found significantly positive increases in mood and subjective happiness scores. So it's convincing for sure. A group of scientists are convinced by it.
I'm sure there's a whole lot of young people out there who are thinking about a career in science and now thinking that means you'll be able to experiment on your colleagues. So
it's
excellent. Yeah.
And then when we're talking about optimism and conservation, this is what it can feel very challenging in this field, where conservation is full of challenges that are quite overwhelming. When you start to really scratch the surface and understand the extent of the challenges, it can overwhelm you. And so what we've been trying to do is, again, focus on the stories of hope and give people actions, because that ability for people to to take an action that makes sense and makes a difference is so important in how we do our conservation work. So we see ZOOSVIC's role in the broader conservation space really as helping people, guide them on the right path of tangible actions that we can all take as humans on this planet to help wildlife. So some pretty powerful things that we can engage in.
And it is that future focus is so important of imagining how the future can be better and then striving to get there. I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we're going to do now is throw to a quick video on the bushfires and some of the challenges we face there. And then Jenny and I will talk through a few examples of how we put this into practice.
So I'm Leanne Wicker and I'm the Senior Vet at Healesville Sanctuary. So here I am at Malakuta. I'm actually in a community hall where we've set up a triage station for wildlife that's affected by the fires here at Malakuta. I've been seeing lots of wildlife, mainly koalas. They're affected by the fire, they're sooty and burnt, they're little singed ears. I guess on a really positive note, we've been releasing a few of our koalas. So they came in, they were dehydrated and maybe they'd inhaled a bit of smoke, and we've had them on fluids and treated some really superficial wounds, but we've been able to get some out, which is really, really lovely. And I think we all need a little bit of a, nice little positive story. So yeah, you can see how many people are here. We've got some really great systems in place. So we've got great volunteers going out and getting leaf, and then someone's blending it, putting it in the freezer, and now I've got this whole bunch of volunteers who 4 times a day are going around and giving the koalas their paste feed, which is absolutely vital for them. But it's also really wonderful for those volunteers because there's something really lovely about being able to give that care, and they can do something really practical. You know, I'm treating all of the wounds with one of the other vets here, but you know, it's really lovely that those volunteers are able to sit down and provide this great source of food to the koalas. It doesn't take them very long to realise what's in that syringe, and they love it. So it's a really nice kind of soul food, and everyone needs a bit of soul food.
So bushfires, 2020 will be remembered, we thought, for the bushfires. And for us at Zoos Victoria, it's been an incredibly interesting 4 months. Since the 2nd of January, we've really been on high engagement with a lot of bushfire work followed by the coronavirus. But it's been an interesting reflection for me as CEO of this organization. In 2009, we were involved in the bushfires, but to a really small extent. The hospital up at Healesville Sanctuary received a number of animals that had been injured. Our staff were engaged and were able to help, but it was a very small engagement we had with the bushfire in 2009. We've spent the last decade becoming a zoo-based conservation organization, really equipping ourselves to be ready to deal and help animals when they get into trouble. And it's never been more obvious than this year, where the state burned, the country burned, and so the extent of that burn across Victoria was absolutely dramatic.
The extent of it was significant, but also the areas that burned were the biodiversity hotspots. So I just remember waking up that morning on January 2nd and looking at where the fire was starting to burn and how severe it was, and just knowing what critically endangered species call that the last stronghold. And so it was one of those moments that I think you'll always remember where you were at that time. And it's horrifying, but I think how far we've come since then in working through that is incredible.
And so the first thing that happened was we got hold of DELP, we got hold of the Victorian government and started to talk about our vets being deployed to help. You know, the first thing that the government does is have to make the fire ground safe. And that's the work of DELP, the firefighting agencies, and Parks Victoria. Just amazing people going out there very selflessly working to control the fire. But as a fire ground gets under control, what starts to happen is animals come out. And generally the first ones that come out, as we saw in that video, are the koalas. And they are such a poster child for what's going on. And when you stop and think about vets that are working with koalas all the time, it's actually our vets, the 13 vets that work for Zoos Victoria, that actually have this expertise. It's our keepers that know how to look after koalas. And so you and your team went in and started helping to coordinate a response, to set up triage stations. And, you know, that ridiculous optimism we have of, we don't know if you need us or not, but we're coming in to help. And that was very much the forward action that you brought to this.
Yeah, it was an incredible time where we almost saw it as a bit of a call to arms. You know, the state, there was human tragedy associated with it, and then there was the environment tragedy and the animal welfare tragedy. And we went, right, we can do our piece in society and help where our expertise is. And that is, without a doubt, Zoos Victoria employs some of the most experienced and compassionate wildlife vets with just incredible knowledge and expertise in treating the unique wildlife that lives here. And so we thought, you know, let's put our hands up, roll our sleeves up, get in there and do something that can help us get through this period. And we haven't turned back ever since. And that was, you know, these bushfires we're not considering as a one-off event. We're really looking at them as that was a dramatic event that's going to have impacts for years to come, and we're pacing ourselves as recovery over this next period, but also preparing ourselves for more in the future. And so that's part of the work at the moment.
And let's share a little bit more about how the bushfires unfolded. I mean, the next thing we realized is that our vets couldn't do it all, because we established 3 triage centers. That paste you just saw, we had a team down at Werribee that was collecting leaves and making paste, and then we were shipping those out in army helicopters up into Malakuta and out to the triage centers. And we quite quickly realized that we needed other vets to work with us. And so at Healesville, we ran a training session. We got vets in from the AVA,
Australian Veterinary Association.
Yeah, AVA, the Australian Veterinary Association, the RSPCA, Animals Australia, all kinds of people who have vets on their rosters, vets who work with them. And they came up and got some training because, you know, those koalas look super cute, but they're not, right? They're wild animals and they're big and strong, those
very
males.
puffy.
And the males they're injured and they're angry and they're hurt. And so you can't change bandages without doing an anesthetic. I think the saddest part was when the vets told me that the little baby ones, they don't have to anesthetize because they just kind of give up. And they just sit there being incredibly stoic while their bandages are being changed. So such a huge amount of work mobilizing people to actually help. I remember also seeing up at Healesville Sanctuary, one of our volunteers was feeding leaves one at a time to a very sick koala. That's got to be the best job in the world.
It's incredible. But I think hit the nail on the head there, Jenny, where you touched on all of the different wildlife groups and animal welfare organisations that just rallied together, and that collective support and power as part of the broader state response was a game changer, I think. And yeah, the rallying of that together was just incredible.
And the sense of camaraderie of all of us in this together. And then the next thing was organised by the Victorian government. They brought a whole bunch of scientists together.
Yes, yeah.
And to look at the area burnt and to look at what species live largely within what is called now the fire scar. And the lists coming out are just staggering when you start to consider anything where 50 to 80% of the habitat of those species have been burned. The list coming out of the Threatened Species Commissioner's office is somewhere around 120 different animal species, birds, frogs, insects, it's running into 200 or 300, and in plants, another 200 or 300 plants that only occurred in the area where the fires have been. And this incredible group of scientists, and your team were there, actually came up literally within 2 weeks with a plan on what we need to do to start recovering these critically endangered species that have been impacted.
And that plan is now in action, which is just so exciting.
So
Again,
exciting.
the optimism and hope associated with that action is so powerful, and having things that we can actually gather community support to deliver is incredible. But the other thing that struck me going through this period was, I think the small moments of happiness and joy that we all savored as a group to go through. And we had really hard days, and then we had days where we got incredible news from the field. So one example was our partners in New South Wales, up in Mount Kosciuszko. They were doing surveys. They went up to check on the state of the corroboree frog enclosures that are in the wild up there that are chytrid free for the frogs to be reared in. And they went up. They saw the first look was just complete devastation. The fire had swept through and done a lot of damage. A lot of the steel infrastructure was just melted. And you know, the researchers went up and had a look, and it wasn't looking good by sight. But what these guys do to survey a lot of the frogs and see who's around is they give out a frog call. I'm not going to attempt it because I am no good at a corroboree frog call. But the researchers can do it very well, and they put out a call and then sat and waited to see if they were going to hear anything back. And they did. And it was just one of those moments because they filmed it, and you could feel through the footage that excitement of having these little tiny vulnerable frogs just survive such a devastating bushfire. And as the frogs started to emerge from the ground where they'd been retreating as the fire passed through, the joy on those researchers' faces is just incredible.
Wouldn't it would just be so uplifting, and we start to realize how much of the Australian bush has actually adapted to fire. And while it's terrifying for us, a lot of insects, invertebrates, they all just go down under the ground and then come out afterwards when there's all the ash around. We also heard stories of animals helping animals, like wombats, right? Because I'm a big everyone knows I love wombats, and I heard they're really good guys.
I know. I'm sorry to burst that bubble, Jenny, but we actually had that wombat story as an example of something the team were in hysterics laughing about, because it was a vicious rumour about wombats, that they were actually out there herding other animals into their burrows to, you know, rescue them from the flames passing through. And so that's not entirely true. I'm sorry to burst everyone's bubble, but they do save a lot of animals indirectly. So if there's an empty wombat burrow with a wombat nowhere to be seen, a lot of animals can retreat in there and survive the fires that pass through. However, if there is a wombat in the vicinity, they are not a very social animal and will not be very welcoming to any animal coming into their space. So we did, you know, those of us that know wombat behaviour, we did have a good chuckle at the thought of wombats out there herding others in, knowing their general temperament. But they are heroes in a sense that they create these spaces available for animals to use. So, you know, they're not all bad, but they're cool animals. I love an animal with a bit of attitude like that. They're great.
And so in the story of our bushfire engagement, we also were involved in an extraction just ahead of the fire front. We brought bristlebirds in here, kept them at Melbourne Zoo until the fire front passed. And literally days before we were in shutdown, we managed to get them back out into the wild. And I think people miss that as zoos, we don't want to keep lots of animals here. Really, we want to be able to add our skills and our resources and then get them back out into the wild as soon as it's safe to do that. And of course, the animals we most want to get back into the wild as soon as possible are those koalas, those cute and cuddly. And I think we got a little video of some of the koalas going back out.
So excited that we're moving him today to Phillip Island, where he'll have even more space and even more peace. All of his burns are completely healed and he doesn't need to be in hospital anymore. It's really exciting. So obviously the aim is to get him back into the forests of Malakuta, and we'll just wait till there's some regeneration there. I think everyone knows how devastated the area is, but I can't tell you how awesome it is to be taking Leafy out of the hospital and off to the next stage on his way home. I just looked up and saw Trip sitting in the fork of a tree that's just gently swaying in the breeze, and it's just so lovely to see her up there looking out here on Phillip Island, which is just a little holiday house for them. Really, they're going to finish the last of their recuperation before we get them back into the wild in Malakuta.
I don't know about all of you, but I start to feel that. I tear up, the idea of animals going back into the wild. But the other thing that absolutely caught me and was so different this time was the support we got from around the world, the support from zoos and aquariums that raised fundraisers and still have been doing it even as they were facing the COVID shutdown. The Cincinnati Zoo sold T-shirts.
It's my favourite T-shirt I own. I love it.
Because they have a very famous hippopotamus called Fiona, and so Fiona extended her friendship to Australian animals, and they sold these super cute T-shirts and raised $100,000. The Prague Zoo raised a massive fundraiser, and they got the whole country of Czech involved in helping us. And people just love Australian animals, so it became super clear that, and I think it's about 45 different zoos around the world reached out to help us with this and to help us not just save koalas, but actually do the recovery that goes forward. And we have a whole plan around that. We also had families and children coming into our zoos carrying their pocket money. They ran fundraisers. They sold cookies. They made lemonade. We had pensioners doing sausage sizzles in their retirement villages and bringing that money into the zoo. And I believe we have Emma and Nate on the line, who are two absolutely little wildlife legends. They raised $2,000 And so huge shout out to you guys, and have been attending these sessions as they're such passionate animal lovers. And that's what really gives me the hope for the future, is just how our community responded. And so everyone from big name supporters, billionaires donated to us, and children brought in all of their savings, the $60 they've saved for their whole life. And that combined made us realize how important our natural world is, how important our animals are. And the connections and the relationships we have with you, our supporters, donors, members, and the connections we have with the people who come through the gate.
And I'd say people like Emma and Nate, who just put their all into this, were some of the most inspiring for us. The kids showing the concern and standing by our sides in this fight for the wildlife is just another one of those moments for us that helped us get us through this really tough period. And a colleague from the Arthur Rylah Institute, Fern Haynes, described it as how we should try and focus on the challenges that the bushfires presented us as, focus on the opportunities. And this is, again, the psychology of optimism. What are the opportunities that come out of this challenge? And Fern describes it as a moment of change. And so we, as Zoos Victoria, see it as our responsibility with our partners to harness this moment of change and get the community gathered together to stand for wildlife. And that's part of what we're focusing on now, with help from Emma and Nate and other very generous kids and supporters like that.
And then just as we thought we had it, Sal, we were like, we're gathering this moment of change. We've got the community with us. We're really moving forward. Nature wasn't done with us yet.
2020 came back with a vengeance.
And we found ourselves on the 18th of March rapidly being asked to rein back in. We put limits on our capacity of who we could invite in. And on the 24th of March, we had the incredibly difficult decision that our board had to make, that we had to close. And so we closed our gates to the public. And for me, this is really quite emotional, because as we've just shared, we get so much of our optimism from watching the faces of children seeing animals, of having them learn and come on the journey. And we almost, to turn that off, feels like we're doing half of our work.
So we had to, what we had to do was try and figure out a way we can keep that connection with the community, make sure people still had the joys of viewing animals, but without physically being able to be here. And so the team rallied together and came up with what I'm hoping you guys have all seen, which is our live streaming of some of our amazing animals here. So we could try and maintain that connection between wildlife and humans as part of that animal-based therapy and connection to wildlife.
And now I realize I've also been remiss, much as that was interactive. This is actually also an interactive session, and in about 5 or so minutes, we're going to be looking at some of your questions. So if you haven't sent in questions so far, please do. And if they're very difficult, I'll give them to Sal to answer. And if they're easy, I'll take them.
Might handball them back. We'll see.
Please feel free to throw questions in, because that became important. We know how to interact with people on property, but interacting through these new mediums, usually we're talking to you guys down in Leopard Lodge with a glass of wine in our hands, and here we are in an empty room listening to possums running up and down the roof and hoping you can't hear them. So that's a bit creepy.
Look, it's weird here. There's a lot of possum activity that we're hearing on the roof, but because we're wildlife advocates, we're letting them be. But if you're hearing that thumping, it's possums.
But so we didn't actually close. While we weren't able to have visitors coming into our zoos, we weren't able to close as such, because of course we have a duty of responsibility to the animals that live here, to making sure they still had great lives. And Sal, you've been doing some intriguing research over this period.
Yeah, so it's again, as a researcher, one of the most interesting questions to study with zoo animals or other animals that are in close contact with humans is, what is that relationship between the human and the animal? How do the animals respond to humans? And so obviously animals in zoos are used to visitors, and we have a good understanding of across different species how they respond to visitors in their day-to-day life. But the minute there's this day, or these couple of weeks, months actually, where no visitors, it's flown by, that's how. where visitors aren't here at all, was a completely different scenario for a lot of these animals. So our brilliant animal welfare team, led by Amanda Emery and Hannah Larson, got together and rapidly planned some incredible research. And our strategy in this period, thinking that zoos around the world would be on this path as well, going, quick, what are we going to study in the visitor effect of these animals? We went, right, let's focus in on these understudied, underrepresented animals. So the brilliant welfare team here went straight for the butterflies, and that was an incredible project that's underway at the moment, learning about how they've responded to no visitors here. And also some of the reptiles. We also did, gorillas and other animals as well. But I think most exciting will be what we learn from those really understudied groups like the butterflies and reptiles. So it'll be exciting. And we do fecal sampling as well, which is another favourite topic of mine to start talking about. So that tells us the physiological stress response of a lot of these animals. But we didn't fecal sample butterflies. That was a missed opportunity, I think, but probably not possible. And I'm sure the invert people would be thinking that right now.
And so we have this unique control experiment situation, how they behaved with no humans. And now that we open our gates, we'll be able to see how they behave with the humans back. And so, just a unique opportunity for us to learn. And I think in that optimism, this is why at Zoos Victoria, we talk about curiosity as one of our values, because that being curious, when you see a tough situation, you could say, oh, that's really bad. Or you could say, I wonder why it's like that. And I wonder what I can learn during this period. And so that's been a real focus for us.
Yeah.
The other thing, if you want to know what the people have been doing, I can tell you there's two things that I definitely know everyone's been doing on site while you've all been at home. The first thing is we've eaten too much chocolate.
Very true.
The team from Melbourne Zoo laid out Easter chocolate on everyone's desks and no one came into work. So I felt duty bound to eat my way through most of the Easter chocolate. I then bought replacement chocolate because I'm a good person, and now I've eaten most of that as well. So I really hope everyone comes back soon. And then the other thing we didn't know we were going to be doing nearly as much of is dancing. There's been a lot of that.
There has. Not from WCS, the Wildlife Conservation and Science team. We're yet to...
and not good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I was going to say we've got improvements to make in that space. But it's been fun watching the teams throw their all into these dance comps.
So I'm not sure even what that says about us on any psychology scale, but what it does mean is that we really miss you all and we really want you to come back. And so we have a little video to share with you just how much we would love to see you all again.
Hi, I'm Adam, and on behalf of everyone here at Zoos Victoria, we cannot wait to have you back at our zoos from Monday, June 1st.
While the community have been looking after people, here at Zoos Victoria, we've been looking after the animals. And I can tell you, they are so looking forward to seeing you guys come back.
Initially, the number of visitors to Melbourne Zoo will be 2,000 visitors per day. Healesville Sanctuary will be 1,500 visitors per day, and Werribee Open Range Zoo will be 1,000 visitors per day.
You'll have to book your tickets online beforehand, and this includes tickets for toddlers and babies also.
To keep everyone safe, we have plenty of hand sanitising stations around. At this stage, our indoor areas will remain closed, but don't worry, cafes are still open for our takeaway coffee. Thanks, Jess.
While we're not doing keeper talks and encounters for now, our Spirits of the Sky show will still be running.
Our safari bus will be running at Werribee Open Range Zoo with reduced numbers to keep everyone safe.
We also have dinosaurs at all three of our zoos. Trust me, they're impressive.
We can't wait to see you at our 3 great zoos. But don't forget, buy your tickets online before you come.
So Adam's become a bit of a superstar, and you can see why his dancing is one of the better ones. But Sal, we're now open for questions, and please feel free to send those through. But starting off, Emma and Nate, who have raised $2,000 for our bushfire, they want to know, what are you doing with the money? And if you got more, what would you do with it?
Great question, you guys. That's been just an absolute, I think, incredible experience for us to be able to, again, use the community support to focus on what we do in the recovery space. So we've phased our work in this area into different stages. So the first one was the immediate rescue work, and that's where our vets were really critical to get boots on the ground and help the wildlife. So a lot of the funding contributed to us being able to deliver that care. Then we had a lot of koalas that needed to come back into our hospitals, our wildlife hospitals, while they underwent a lot of surgeries to get their burns back to normal, and rehydration, and a lot of fattening up from the stressful period that they'd been through, which is difficult for a koala. So they needed a lot of intensive care. And so the funding helped get those koalas through that period as well. Now we're moving into a recovery facilitating phase. And so that's focusing a lot on making sure that the koalas can go back to the wild, but also the threatened species focus for now. So we're looking at the moment at, as a result of the generous support from the community, building specialist amphibian houses, because spotted tree frogs, for example, large brown tree frogs and giant burrowing frogs are hanging by the brink. And so we hope by spring to be able to actually start our first ever insurance population for the spotted tree frogs. And so we've got our very own frog prince, we call him here in the team, is our amphibian specialist and reptile specialist, Dion Gilbert, who's leading the team to develop these specially designed breeding facilities for these species. So we hope to be able to contribute to breeding that animal, that species, and getting it back to the wild as soon as the wild has recovered. So significant plans as a result of the generous support and funding, and frogs being a particular area of focus for the threatened species work. And native rodents are the other area of focus for us that everyone loves a native rodent, especially Dr. Marissa Parrott, who's the biggest advocate for these incredible species that work here. And I think by the end of the next year or so, we'll have the whole Victorian community behind some of these critically endangered species that have suffered from the bushfires that we're going to do our absolute best to bring back. So just, some exciting progress in both that immediate rescue and response to the wildlife, and also the threatened species long-term recovery approach.
And I think another thing, Nate and Emma, that when you ask, how did your donations help, please never underestimate how much it inspires and helps us keep going when times are tough. Knowing that there's people out there who believe in us and trust us to do this work really makes a big difference to people who are working long hours, long nights in order to deliver.
Even on that, Jenny, the pictures we got sent from the kids, it was, okay, I'll choke up talking about it, but I've got some of them up in my office. I know you've got a whole wall of Jenny's office with pictures from kids who drew, koalas undergoing care and bits of wildlife from all over the place that, just showed the kids that were there, and that, that rallied us, kept us going. So it was powerful.
We're both a sucker for a picture if you draw one. Zoe's asking us, what's the one thing we would do differently or consider next time? So I think there's two of us, we each get a chance. So what would you do different next time?
Good question. That's a tough one. I think this is my first experience working this intensely in a fire response capacity. And so what I saw worked incredibly well that I mentioned earlier was the collective collaboration of all of the different animal welfare and threatened species teams gathering together. But I'd say we've still got a lot of work to do with the local regional communities and what we can do, because we're often working or operating out of Zoos Victoria, but the impacts are spread throughout the regional parts of Victoria. So more more direct work with supporting the local communities, and that's another area of focus for us as we move forward. But I think if we had have done that a bit earlier in this period, we would have more traction. We're still working on it now, but that nature-led community recovery for the directly impacted regional communities in Victoria, bring that as front and centre from day one of the response is, I think, is something important.
For me, I think it's being better prepared. We hear, and it's probably in our optimistic natures, we hear this will be a bad bushfire season. But what we didn't do was ask 200 vets to come in for training. We didn't do this ahead of the fires. And I think we know this now for next time, and actually even before the next time. Every year, somewhere around October, we should be running training that gets us ready for the next bushfire. You know, the CFA are just a wonderful organization. And they're always ready. They don't go, oh, we don't think we need to do it this year. And I think we as wildlife people need to be on that front foot. There's always a threat to wildlife. It's always a possibility. And so I would like to be more ready for next time, to have the wards ready to go. And this is where that support's going to be great.
And my favourite saying associated with that I've heard recently is that we need to be ready for go, not for show. And so that means getting everyone prepared, ready, on the same page, that we can rally like that. I mean, it was incredible the speed of which everyone was able to, but I think we could have done that ready to go even sooner next time.
Then Luke, hey Luke, nice to see that you're online tonight. Luke Eaton is one of our wildlife legends as well, and you baked cookies.
Celebrity around the office here. The team, my conservation science team, just love Luke.
Okay, you give him a big head. He also baked amazing cookies and sold those.
Yes.
He's asking how we both stay positive during the really tough days.
Oh,
okay. I have given away my chocolate secret, but I have another secret. What's your bad day?
So I, as you've probably noticed, as a scientist, love engaging in curiosity. I did a lot of reading in this period about what good self-care can look like and managing that. And so I found, I obviously ran myself through a randomized controlled experiment through this period as well, where I didn't physiologically sample myself, you'll be pleased to know, but I learned through what worked for me through moods and approaches during the day. And I found the days I did even just a slow walk, some form of exercise in the morning, was really important to my mental state and ability to work effectively throughout the day. So I started a new routine of getting up early, getting moving, doing exercise, and building that into my routine. And then practicing some mindfulness as well. So on walks, I'd start noting down, the different smells, scents, the sights, and being really present in that moment and focusing on problems that were within my ability to solve. And that significantly helped from a self-care point of view, but also recognizing I'm a human as part of a social species. I really relied a lot on that social connection with the absolute legends in the WCS team, but also across Zoos Victoria and in our community and family and friends as well. So that social connection really helps as well. What about you, Jenny?
Well, I'm like you. I get my recharge from going out there into the zoo, and I have a few favorites. I deny that, but I do. And there's a few animals, if I can just go and sit and watch them and just sit quietly, the world feels all right. There's something, you mentioned the butterfly house, and at the moment it's overwhelmingly good. And to just go in and sit and not think and not do, and not let it be overwhelming, just be in that moment and be grateful for this incredible space that we're able to be in. So that's where I go to recharge, and I stay positive by just remembering all these things. I answer letters that kids write in, and I laugh at the pictures because they're wonderful and beautiful and really engaging. We've got quite a few questions coming in, which is fantastic, and please keep them flowing. We'll have to give shorter answers or we'll be here all night.
I should add, the science actually tells you that you should minimize your caffeine intake in times of stress. So, I mean,
that's not what we do.
No, it's absolutely not a strategy. So this is what we mean by welfare and optimism being an individual experience. You can, I'll quote all of the science and the research and what in theory should work, but you've all got to find your own self-care strategies that's good for you. And for me, caffeine reduction was not a good option, but I counterbalance that with good exercise and mindfulness.
Sally has been bringing me, and that's another thing always works for me, bring me a coffee every morning. Sal's been doing that, so that worked fabulously well. Chantel's asking if there's any animals, particularly koalas, still in the hospitals from the bushfire.
There are a few koalas still undergoing care at Healesville at the wildlife hospital there. But we've also got about 14 undergoing rehab at Phillip Island Nature Park still. So you saw those guys in the video, some of them. It's a beautiful environment there. And I'd encourage you guys to head out, do a day trip. We've got to focus on regional tourism at the moment. Do a day trip. Once you've been to our zoos, get out to the koala reserve at the nature parks and have a look around there. They've done an incredible job as a partner organisation, and our koalas have, after being in intensive care here, moved to a more rehab situation there where they learn to build their strength and get used to the climbing of tall trees again. And while the habitat recovers in Malakuta until we can get them back out. So that's where the koalas are, a lot of them at the moment.
Well, the McFarlane family is asking that, assuming some animals enjoy the visitor interaction, who do you think missed the visitors the most?
Kanzi, I reckon.
Kanzi, the little gorilla.
Kanzi, so this is again a really fascinating. We should have done a webinar on human-animal interactions.
That's coming. It's in the next series.
That's a good one. But again, individual experiences. Our zoo animals are the same as us humans. All of this is on an individual state level. So Kanzi, the gorilla, I think missed those play sequences with visitors. So I'd say she's one. The orangutans also do enjoy just kicking back and people watching a fair bit. So I think those guys were pretty happy to start seeing people come back. And the giant tortoises are known to enjoy a bit of a shell rub at times, and as long as they can control that interaction, it's great for them.
And I think that the animals that have absolutely missed you all the most are the seagulls. They realized you're not coming in, there's no free lunch available, and they harassed us for about a week. You could not, at lunchtime, you couldn't actually go outside without them all landing and yelling at you.
Our CFO, Mark, had a few close
encounters. That was very funny, and I might have taken some pictures of that. But they did disappear for a little while, but I think they got the news already that we were open, and they're back.
Yeah.
They're not missing out.
And this, again, another case of optimism. Wildlife is adaptable, a lot of them, and they will bounce back and react pretty quickly. And we're seeing that as well, how quickly what is being called wildlife reclaiming cities, when humans around the world were in lockdown, all of a sudden a lot of wildlife started coming out. There were wild boars in the streets of Barcelona, and these amazing goats throughout Wales eating people's hedges, and incredible videos online of animals reclaiming the city. They'll probably start to, move back to the outer skirts as people start to come around. But, a learning from this period is what is that relationship between humans and wildlife?
There's a kind of flex that happens. Sophia is asking if we could tell her a bit more about the recovery plan, which you talked about earlier. And Sal, your team very quickly have drawn together the projects that we could do. Thanks to all your generous support and the support from around the world, we raised about $9 million, including funding from the federal government and the state government.
That doesn't give you optimism. What does that?
I mean, just incredible. And we're just absolutely, and still talking now to many other players who raised funds for wildlife and are looking to projects. We have a prospectus, a recovery plan that's about $17 million. So if you are looking for somewhere to support, we would really love to talk to you about that recovery plan and share with you what we're going to be doing. But Sal, that's what you're working on. And do you want to just talk, I think you did cover it off, but it's those 4 different phases, the immediate phase, a second phase now around getting ready for the future events, one around recovering species that have lost a lot of their habitat, and then finally engaging with communities on how they can also help recover the wildlife from their area, and through that recover themselves a bit.
Exactly. So that psychology of interaction with nature and the benefits that connection can bring for humans and wildlife. That's, you know, a big part of what we're planning on exploring and working in further. But yeah, the recovery for us is long game, and I think the funding from the generous support from the community has been an absolute game changer, and the difference between being able to save a species or not. So it's just, it's incredible, and we are on the path for the long game ahead to save these species on behalf of the Victorian community and the international community that have, you know, stood by us in this. And so the focus is wildlife welfare. We want to make sure that wildlife health and welfare is managed well and get ready for the next situation. Threatened species recovery. So we're not going to let any of these species go extinct on our watch. We're going to stay true to this commitment right here on the wall. It's challenged us this year, but we're sticking to it. And then nature-led community recovery. So some exciting stuff ahead.
And I'm going to take the last question because we're coming towards the end of the evening. From Michelle saying, when it gets too overwhelming, as it does, what methods do we both use to get our heads into a more positive space?
So in addition to the self-care strategies I was mentioning before around, I found, you know, early morning exercise and mindfulness works for me, and increasing caffeine intake, not a decrease. I'd say the other thing that I like to focus on and train my brain is on, it's curiosity driven at the core. It's about turning opportunities, turning challenges into learning opportunities, to think about it from sit down and reflect at the end of the day and go, what happened today? What have I learned from this experience that I'm going to either leave behind? So something potentially I wasn't that happy with that I want to leave behind. Some people even write those down and burn them, which is an interesting strategy, quite dramatic if you're into that. And then what have I learned that I'm going to carry forward? And so focusing on the learnings and the new skills that you've developed is a really, I think, helpful way of focusing on the opportunities.
And you never pass up a data collection moment. So exactly. In our senior leadership team, Sally's keeping the running log of who talks with the mute on. So that's
Jenny's high on that list.
I was doing really well, and then I had a bad patch. So she does turn those things.
Yeah.
I think also I turn often to reading and stories of hope, stories of success. The little book that we have,
Ninja Bandicoots.
Yeah, Ninja Bandicoots. If you haven't read it, you got to, because it's just full of these wonderful stories of wonderful people doing amazing stuff.
Yeah.
And then I think I also reflect on just stories like our staff raising funds for Rhino Fund Uganda. Just incredibly motivating, powerful to be able to help others that are in these really difficult times.
And reaching out to people. I mean, we're all in this together. We've got to walk this path together, and it's important that we have that human to human connection.
Except we're not, because we're open. So we're in a great place at this moment. And I really would like to, first of all, thank all of you for joining us this evening. It's been great to have this opportunity to chat with you, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. We sat on our sofa. We can do this for hours and hours and hours, and talk about the things that frustrate us and the things that empower us, and the things we still want to do. We can only do these wonderful things that help animals with your support. And so it is incredible to have so many of our donors and supporters joining us for these conversations. I hope you've enjoyed all 4 of them, and please let us know if you have and if you'd like us to do it again. Of course, we would rather do it sitting out on a lawn on a summer evening, and hopefully we'll do that before the end of the year. But we also have this opportunity with technology to do it through these individual chats. It also is, and I'm wearing my special little badge. Sal, did you know that, it turned upside down. I have one, you don't.
No, I've got another special badge there.
You have the reconciliation.
Yeah.
But the one I have is for Future Hands. And how you get one of these badges is through dedicating a bit of your will to Zoos Victoria so that our work can carry on. And so when we started this program just over 2 years ago, the Future Hands Foundation, Angie came and asked me if I would consider a gift in my will, and I took that home to Richard. and told him that I was going to leave some of my money to the zoo. And he said, well, in that case, he's also going to leave money to a charity. And did I have any in mind? And of course I did. I said Zoos Victoria. And he said, no. So he's leaving
Spread the love.
Spread the love. He's leaving his money to another animal charity. But it is such a wonderful way that people are supporting us as well, is through Future Hands and our conservation partners who have joined us as well.
Acts of kindness.
Acts of kindness. And we're going to finish off with a video, so please don't rush off. We have one more video for you.
And it's a great video. Love this.
Which tells you the journey we've been on in the last 10 years and what our ambition is for the years ahead. So thank you all for joining us. Don't rush off. Watch the video, and we look forward to seeing you back on property soon.
Thank you, everyone.